This is the AT Banter podcast, a balanced and entertaining look at assistive technology, accessibility, and its importance in people's lives. Join Rob Minot, Ryan Fleury, and Steve Barclay as they banter with people around the world about anything and everything about assistive technology and the disability community. Now, on with the show.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of AT Banter.
Banter.
Hey, my name is Rob Minot, and joining me in the room today, Mr. Ryan Fleury.
Good morning.
And Mr. Steve Barclay.
I'd like to know why he always gets first billing.
Actually, that's true. Why is that? I don't know.
I'm the good-looking one.
Oh, right.
Are you really? I thought I was the good-looking one. I don't know. We have to.
I don't know.
We'll have to have a
legend in my own mind.
We'll have to have
You're doing the introductions. We can't.
podcast meeting.
We can't make you any more good looking, Rob.
I'll bring that up in the podcast meeting. Yeah. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good.
I'm on fire about this show today. I'm telling you. I was thinking about it all last night, and yeah, I'm blown out of a cannon today, guys.
Yeah, it's a hot button issue.
Yeah, well, let's just get right into it because I don't want to waste any daylight. Ryan, tell us what we're doing today.
Today we are speaking with Karen Mckay from CELA, the Center for Equitable Library Assistance, I think it was, and also Daniella Levy-Pinto, who is from NNELS, the National Network for Equitable Library Services, about the recent announcement from the federal government about their funding being cut.
This pisses me off so bad. I'm telling you. Okay, so I don't even know where to start with this. Someone else set this up. I'm too angry.
Well, I mean, both of these are national library services that are providing alternative format materials to Canadians. And the government, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to slash their funding over the next, 4 years?
Yeah.
Until they are not being funded at all by the federal government.
$4 million. $4 million, people. Like, the government cannot put in $4 million to these services. It's absolutely incredible. So, and to give this some perspective, so I mean, this is the only way that Braille copies of books are being produced. Like, there's really no other service that provides this, right?
Well, it's Braille, it's audio, it's human narrated audio, it's e-text,
large print,
it's
right?
DAISY. Like, it's multiple formats that are being provided to people with print impairments from these two organizations that you can't get anywhere else.
You can't. Like, there is no. You can't just go to Chapters and be like, yeah, I'd like a Braille copy of this book. There is no other outlet for this. I mean, the government did try to do this to these guys back in 2018, right? And of course, they blinked immediately when there was some public backlash. I'm stunned at this. How often do we go off on about Braille literacy? And we've talked about the Marrakesh Treaty on the show, and we've talked about the Accessible Canada Act. I don't know. When I got that email last week, I was so I could not believe this, because I mean, there's no other plan in place. They're just pulling the funding. They're just saying, no, we're not giving you the money to produce these materials. And I was on the CELA website last night, taking a look around, and there's a stat on the website: 1 in 10 books are produced in alternate formats. 1 in 10.
Hey, you want to hear the part that's even more galling about this, in terms of how much this costs us as Canadians as a percentage of our federal budget? It is 0.001% of our federal budget. It's a tiny drop in the bucket of the federal budget, and something that's so important to people. Like, how can they cut this of all things?
Yeah. Exactly, like Braille literacy. Hello, like how are you going to push Braille literacy when no books are being produced in Braille? Like how? Like what? What?
Well, and also, like you just mentioned, the Marrakesh Treaty, we've just recently entered into an agreement where we will share books cross borders with other nations. And how are we going to do that if there's no money?
Yeah, this is embarrassing. This is honestly, this is
Yeah.
embarrassing for the government to be doing. Like this is, I can't even.
It's shameful. It is just outright shameful. Is
Yeah.
what it is.
Somebody picked some low hanging fruit and we can cut 4 million here.
I don't even know. Like they'd probably spend $4 million on renovating the bathrooms in the Parliament building. Like this is ridiculous. $4 million is nothing in terms of spending, government spending. Like I bet you we could come up with such innocuous, stupid programs that are in existence that cost way more than $4 million. But when it comes to like, Braille books, well, let's just cut the funding. Ridiculous. Yeah. Okay. Well, before we go too far down the rant rabbit hole, let's go ahead and bring on our guests.
All right. So, ladies, welcome to AT Banter. I am Ryan, and joining me in the room today are Steve Barclay.
I have coffee.
I am jealous.
And Mr. Rob Minot.
Hello, and I also do have coffee.
Geez, I've only had one so far. I'm behind. And guys, joining us are Karen Mckay from CELA, or the Center for Equitable Library Association, or Canadian Equitable Library?
The Center for Equitable Library Access. It is a mouthful.
Excellent. All right. And also Daniella Levy-Pinto. I hope I pronounced that properly.
You did. Thanks.
Excellent. From the National Network for Equitable Library Services.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us.
So why don't we start with just for anybody out there who doesn't actually really know what you guys do and the services that you guys provide. Let's maybe start there.
Sure, I can take that. This is Karen. So I'm the communications manager for CELA, and Daniela has more hands-on experience than I do. But basically what CELA and also what NNELS does is supply reading materials for people with print disabilities in a variety of accessible formats. So we do that in very similar ways to each other, but also slightly different ways. So CELA provides materials digitally, but also we provide physical materials. So those would be things like audio CDs for use in Daisy Player or other kinds of technology, and also physical Braille and print Braille books, which are, as probably you know, they are picture books which have Braille overlays so that a teacher and student or a parent and child could read those books together regardless of how they read. And so we provide those to our patrons, which are across the country, through our member libraries and also directly through our website.
And I can speak about the NNELS side, as we also provide books in accessible formats for our readers through public libraries. We have a program that produces print Braille children's books and have these physical copies in libraries across the country, and this is important for inclusive reading. We also work with publishers on the Braille side to help them produce simultaneous releases, the Braille format at the same time of production, of release of the file. NNELS responds to patron requests of titles in the format that they may need. NNELS employs people with lived experience of print disability to actually assess the accessibility of files and reading applications. So that's the user perspective that we provide. So as Karen said, we do similar things, but also do things a bit differently as well.
So it sounds like how much of a hand do you have in, say, taking something like a book of fiction that's new and making that into a Braille book? Like, do you guys do the brailing, or is that something that you assist the actual publisher in producing that braille copy?
So we do the brailing thanks to funding, and then we do hire the transcribers to do the brailing. A lot of the time, what happens with publisher files is that they are not ready to be read with a refreshable braille display. So human intervention, human work is needed, and that's what we do. We don't do it automatically. We do it with human transcribers to ensure that everything is accurate and up to standards.
Well, and it sounds like that's a fairly involved process, and maybe that's something that a lot of people don't really realize. I think that people maybe think, and I'm probably guilty of this, that it's just the act of taking a digital file of a book and turning that into braille would be a fairly straightforward process. But it sounds like that's not necessarily the case, because it sounds like there needs to be human hands in that, and there needs to be some conversion process involved in there.
Indeed, and this is not only time consuming, but it's also not cheap. Right. And the funding does allow us to do that. And braille, as we know, is essential for literacy, and it's a specific need that would not be addressed by industry, precisely because a lot of intervention and formatting needs to happen to the files so that they work well for braille readers.
So we should also point out that this is a free service that you offer to users. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And the same for CELA. It's free to users.
And so let's talk about the funding. How long has CELA and NNELS been in existence and been receiving funding through the government?
So our stories are a little bit different. So CELA was established in 2014, and it was spun off essentially from the CNIB library. And so previously, the funding for this service was provided via charity by people donating to that, as well as with some government funding. So when we were established as our own entity, we started to pursue different areas of funding. We still received some funding as we were separating from CNIB from the funds they received from the federal government. But then just 2 years ago, I believe it was, we were able to begin receiving the funding directly from the federal government. So that's the $4 million that we're talking about that's in jeopardy of being cut, or has been announced that it's been cut. So that represents about 65% of CELA's budget. And then we receive funding in a couple of other ways. The federal or the provincial offices often fund us. We're funded by a number of provinces across the country. And then there's also some areas where we are funded directly by libraries. They subscribe to our services. So it's a little convoluted. It's not an easy answer to that question. But the federal funding that we're talking about, the funds that are in jeopardy, that money goes directly towards the production and the distribution of accessible materials. The other funding from the provinces are more about how we support our library service. So that runs the digital downloads and that sort of thing that we need to do. The administration, all of that kind of thing is funded out of our provincial funding, but the materials that we provide are funded out of the federal funding.
And Daniella, will it impact NNELS the same way that it's impacting CELA?
Right. So I can offer a little bit of history as well. So NNELS started was created in late 2013 by a group of libraries that wanted to ensure that public libraries would have more hands-on service for their users. This group of libraries, the NNELS creators, fund the operations in terms of maintaining the repository of books, But some of the production is also covered by the provincial partners. Not all provinces have NNELS services. Most provinces do. And yeah, so some of the production, especially for ebooks, is covered by the provincial partners. Now, the federal funding that we are also talking about, NNELS started getting it in 2018, importantly to expand services, to expand the range of formats that NNELS could produce. So NNELS started working with Braille and audio after receiving this funding. Also, this funding has allowed NNELS to work more closely with publishers, precisely to help them become better able to produce accessible, born accessible content. So a lot of, or all this work is, or would be affected. Also, NNELS is creating videos and tutorials and materials to provide information to users on how to use different reading applications. And so it's, there are several projects that would be affected if funding is lost.
Right, and that funding is $4 million to be basically gone within the next 4 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, the government's planning to reduce it by $1 million each year until it is fully withdrawn in the year 2024, 2025. So that $4 million is split between CELA and NNELS. So essentially our budgets each of our budgets are being cut by 25% for the federal money each year until there's no money left for production for CELA stuff.
Right. And so back, I think in 2018, this popped up as well, did it not? That there was talk that the government was going to cut the funding?
Yes, it did. And at that point, CELA was still working with CNIB with regards to the funding. And so that funding was restored very quickly once the media caught wind of it, essentially. The funding was restored. Within a few hours, we'd received notice of that. So the other thing to bring into this piece is that the government in 2018 signed the Marrakesh Treaty, which also essentially they committed to not only folks in Canada, but around the world to be providing print materials for people with print disabilities.
Right.
And, by cutting this funding, they're withdrawing their support of that and pushing it on to other funding sources, be that industry or provinces or municipalities. And really that's going to introduce a level of inequity back into the system that CELA and NNELS have been working very hard to eradicate over the past number of years. Yeah. So the federal funding, we were kind of scratching our heads a little bit about the withdrawal of the federal funding because it doesn't make sense on a lot of different fronts.
Who in government is responsible for the decisions to cut this funding?
So we're funded through Minister Qualtro's office, Carla Qualtro, and her office title keeps changing, but it's workforce. Daniela, do you remember the name of it? It's I'm just going to look it up. I should have had that up on my screen.
Yeah, the title.
Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion. That's the name of her ministry. So she's responsible for the funding for CELA and NNELS for this project. There was also some funding available through Heritage Canada, which is kind of a different thing, and it's supporting publishers, and Daniela probably can speak more to that than I can. But the sad piece is that all of this funding that was put in place to support accessible funding is all drying up at the same time, and the onus is being pushed to other entities other than the federal government. And as I said earlier, that introduces inequities into the system that we need to move past, right? All Canadian residents should have access to materials that they can read. And if government needs to support components of that because there's not a place in the market for that to be done efficiently and effectively and cost effectively, then the government has made this commitment. The federal government has made this commitment through Marrakesh to provide these materials. It's also, it calls into into question human rights issues, that we know they signed on to the developmental points through the UN. And so, one of that is education and having access to the resources that you need for education. So there's lots and lots of layers to this question. But really, if people want to get in touch with somebody, it's Carla Qualtrough who's making the decision on this. And also we're asking people to get in touch with Chrystia Freeland as well, because her portfolio also influences this one.
Yeah, I can speak more about the heritage funding, or the funding that how accessible publishing is working. So in 2019, the federal government allocated $22.8 million in 5 years for accessible publishing. So this would be to work directly with publishers to create awareness, teach them about accessibility, and build capacity for them to create born accessible content. We are on year 2, about to start year three of that initiative. NNELS has been working with publishers in a lot of helping them with a lot of the work, knowing that Canadian independent publishers, working with them, it is clear that there is a lot for them to do. A lot of them will not be able to create born accessible content, and I'm only talking about, for example, ebooks, by the time when the heritage funding is supposed to end as well. We know that not only publishers will not likely be able to produce all the content they create born accessible, but also these other materials there's not a commercial incentive for them to produce.
Right.
What's going to happen with all of these? And we know that publishers can't. So publishers have also been very supportive of our campaign. They value the work. They recognize they will not be able to fill all the gaps for accessible reading for people with a broad range of print disabilities.
And so this announcement from the government was made last week, and the media outlet CBC's done interviews, AMI, Global, we're broadcasting this as well. It's been out on Twitter, Facebook. Has the government approached you guys yet to enter into any sort of negotiations, or have they gone silent?
So we started advocating with the government as soon as the announcement was made back in December as part of the fall economic statement. So we've been having ongoing conversations with them. But as of yet, we have not been presented with any kind of resolution. These processes, unfortunately, often are slow and a bit onerous, and there's a bit of gamesmanship in it with regards to how these things play out. But what I can tell you is that we're continuing to advocate, that we are seeing a lot of response to the advocacy campaign. We're hearing lots of letters are being passed on from our patrons, from our users, from their family members, and we've gotten lots of support from other outside organizations. Learning disability organizations are on board and are writing letters. Letters are going out from libraries. We've had response from authors and publishers. So there's a groundswell of awareness, which is fabulous. And I'm sure there's lots of MPs that are doing their research now about what accessible book publishing means, because of all the phone calls that they're getting into their offices. We are hopeful. We know that Carla Qualtrough has been a great advocate of people with disabilities in the past, and up until this situation, we have been quite pleased with how she had advocated, not just only for CELA users, but more broadly for the disability community. And so we're hopeful that she's working behind the scenes to try and turn this ship around a little bit, because $4 million for the federal government in the context of their broad budget, and in the context of what that money represents and how valuable it is to a wide number of Canadians. And there's estimated 1 in 10 Canadians with print disabilities. That $4 million is a drop in the bucket. I'd love them to drop it into my bank account, but that's not going to happen. But it's not a lot of money in the context of a federal government budget. And so we're hopeful, but we don't have any great news to share right now.
Well, and Carla herself has a vision impairment, so hopefully she's part of the community. She's advocating, hard and strong to the people above her.
Yeah, I would hope so. She has been a friendly face in the past, and I'm sure that this is a very painful decision for her. Like, I don't think it's one that she's taken lightly or unadvisedly. I do think that that there needs to be a broader conversation about how we have sustainable funding for these sorts of services, which are not commercially viable, which again, if we push them down onto different levels of government or into different funding models, would introduce inequity, like I said before. And so, there's a role for the federal government here. And Daniella can speak more because she's more involved with the publishers, but we know that publishers are paying attention. We know that they're making efforts to create more books in a more accessible way. But, they're also dealing with all of the issues with COVID, all the resource issues that have come from that. There's lots of layers at play here. And so to withdraw this funding now, this year, without really a solid plan for how we're going to serve folks with print disabilities going forward, especially Braille readers in particular. We're scratching our heads a little bit.
Yeah, and since we work closely with publishers, we really know it's very encouraging and it's great to see them working hard and trying to do the best they can for creating accessible content, but they are also, not only dealing with the impacts of the pandemic and having to adjust internally. There is also a lot of variety of materials, and it's not as simple as producing now everything by decree. For example, books with a lot of images need different treatment. Publishers don't have yet expertise on creating image descriptions for that content. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Also important to remember that the industry-based solution would only apply to Canadian independent publishers that go through Heritage or are funded federally through Heritage. This would not apply to international publishers or multinational publishers. So what happens with that content? There are so many pieces, and there's so much content that would likely fall through the cracks. So by ensuring that both NNELS and CELA can continue to operate, it ensures more of an equitable reading landscape for everyone, regardless of province, regardless of economic status. Also, a commercial solution, of course, means that people need to pay for that content. And in a community of people in which unemployment is so high, this is also an issue. Another issue that both NNELS and CELA are very important for is reaching that content, reaching that accessible content. We know that reading platforms used in public libraries, they're not necessarily accessible with assistive technologies, with screen readers, for example. So until all of those pieces have a solution, we feel that it is really important to ensure that there will be continued support.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, being outside of all of that, in terms of like not really being sort of an insider into the what the government's been doing and how the funding has gone, like I'm shocked. I'm shocked that they're doing this, and I mean, especially in the age of the Accessible Canada Act and the Marrakesh Treaty, all these pieces that were falling into place in terms of really being able to create this idea of an equitable landscape. To pull the plug on this funding, it seems so counterintuitive, and I have to agree. Like, as a taxpayer, like $4 million, you're absolutely right. That's a drop in the bucket. Like, in fact, they should triple the funding, because the stat on the website is, fewer than 1 in 10 books are able to be produced in an accessible format. That's not even acceptable. It shocks me that this is happening. And frankly, as somebody who for years has really been an advocate for Braille literacy, it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, we would echo all of that. And if you wanted to give Carla Qualtrough a call and say that would be awesome.
I definitely will.
It is. It is a bit disheartening in the face of, knowing that only 1 in 10 books are accessible. I had a conversation with a patron the other day around this and the impact of this. And I said, without these federal funds, we would not be able to have produced the Books for Canada Reads, which is happening right now, which is a national conversation about the one book that all Canada should read. I mean, that's their their tagline. And so that would leave folks out of that national conversation. And those books are, they're selected to reflect Canadian experience, and they're selected to reflect a variety of stories and to be inclusive. And for us to say to folks, I'm sorry, we can't, we don't have the funds to make this happen in the timeline that it needs to happen. We don't have the support from the government to make it happen. You can't be part of that conversation, is heartbreaking, right? And it flies in the face of everything that we are learning right now about equity and diversity and inclusion, right, and all of those things that the government itself has championed as part of, not only including folks with disabilities more broadly in our society, but just everyone, making sure that everybody has a place and a voice and the resources they need to succeed. And so, it's a technical issue in some areas. It's a conversation that we need to have with a variety of people, but at its core, it's really about, do we want to make sure that everybody can be included? And when you break it out in those sorts of terms, in that kind of framework, it's an easy yes. And we are hopeful that the government will see it that way too, given the amount of the amount of funds really is not substantial. And there's a case to be made. We know that materials available to folks in accessible formats helps them with their education, and it helps them with their economic prospects. It helps them in their career development. It helps them in social inclusion, like, for example, with the Canada Reads, which speaks to ensuring that they have connections, and there's mental health components in there. And so those $4 million, as an expense, are probably offset by a huge number of economic and financial benefits, right? To make sure that these that everybody has access to these sorts of things, that they can succeed. We had a comment from a lawyer the other day on Twitter who said that the materials that he was able to access in accessible formats, helped him be successful in his career. He's a blind lawyer. And, you think, okay, well, this gentleman's probably paying, reasonable amount of taxes. He's probably contributing exponentially back to the community in non-financial terms. And so, there are other supports for other areas in the government, and you think, okay, they measure those in economic payoffs, which is fair given that it's a financial situation. But there are financial arguments to be made about this is important. There's also social ones, and there's just basic humanity ones. Like, let's include folks. Let's make sure that everybody can succeed. Let's give them a level playing field and a platform on which they can become contributing members of society, that they can be successful, they can be healthy. And so we're hopeful the government will look at it in those terms rather than in raw financial terms.
Well, I think I'm going to start a campaign. I'm totally blind myself. And so I think the campaign I'm going to start is, if the government is going to consider cutting the funding to a library service that affects millions of people, my campaign is I'm going to reach out to all the blind, visually impaired, print impaired people out there and say, don't pay your taxes this year. Let's give it to CELA and NNELS.
Yeah, I don't know if I would do that.
Yeah. I don't think jail terms is really what we're going for here.
Sometimes it takes a protest. You got to stand up for what's right.
Well, it is super frustrating when you look at other decisions this government is making. You know, they're spending $12 billion on a pipeline right now, and they can't find for a service that really does serve a lot of Canadians very, very well. It's crazy.
Well, and even if we take a step back, like, you know, knocking on wood, there'll be a solution quickly with this. But what we don't want to see is that it comes through as part of a stopgap measure. You know, we're restoring funding for a year or whatever. We need to have a sustainable funding formula. And we know that industry wants to step up, and that, you know, that there are other players that need to come to the table. But this situation where every year or every other year we're having to light everybody's hair on fire in order to maintain our funding is just not sustainable. No. It's not great for the community. You know, it's not great for our ability to plan longer term. It's not great for publishers, because they don't know which way is up with regards to what they need to do for accessibility. So, we would be grateful to make sure that, you know, if we receive word that there's funding sustained for the next year. But what we really need is a long-term commitment that's honored by all levels of government, and also, you know, across all parties, federal parties, that they're committed and that they understand the value of this, which is why it's so important that we have so many folks writing their MPs and educating them about this, but also, you know, really drawing this awareness for the broader public, which is definitely happening, that we're seeing on, you know, the media coverage, and we're definitely seeing through our Twitter feeds and that sort of thing. Because, you know, when you explain this to folks, they're like, wow, this doesn't make any sense at all. And it really does not.
And so if people were interested in sending letters, do you have sample letters that people can download and fill out on your websites?
CELA does. So if you go to celalibrary.ca, right on our front page there, you can link out to our advocacy page, and it's got sample letters to write to your MPs. It's got speaking notes if you want to make a phone call. It's got social media materials that you can download. We've got some question and answers there for some of the questions that we're getting from folks. And I think NNELS has something similar, don't they, Daniella?
Yes, we also have an advocacy page. So it's NNELS, NNELS.ca. And then there's the advocacy page there, and there are also sample letters and more information about what this means and the campaign. Some media stories as well.
Right.
Yeah.
The messages that we're trying to really hit on are how important it is for people to write their MPs, because that's what's going to turn this around. But also, as I said earlier, it's going to provide some education for people that maybe aren't completely aware of this issue. And that our goal is, in our conversations with the government, is to not just, you know, restore funding now under public pressure, but to help CELA and NNELS and the publishing industry come up with a plan and provide sustainable funding so that we are not in this situation in an ongoing basis. We are happy to work with publishers and with the government. We want to find ways to make these resources available to more folks more easily, more consistently, with higher quality. All of those sorts of things are part of our goals, but we need government help to make that happen.
I would completely echo that. So what people can do is continue writing to their MPs, or, contacting their MPs and expressing support for this. We are hopeful, but we need to raise our voices together and make very clear that these services matter for equitable reading.
We're certainly going to encourage every single one of our listeners to do just that. But guys, I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you guys are doing in this regard. And you guys are fighting the good fight. Fingers crossed that, we can reverse this. And I think that hopefully there maybe will be a silver lining in the sense that it will bring to the forefront and spotlight the importance of these services and the fact that we need to do the opposite of cutting the funding. We need to actually increase the funding and you're right, get some sort of a plan together.
Well, from your lips to Carla Qualtrow's ears, please.
Come on, Carla. Guys,
and thank you so much for hosting us and for letting us talk about this issue and for raising the issue with your listeners, because really we need across the board support, and we're so grateful that you're helping us share this message.
Yes, thank you so much. We're very grateful for the platform and for your support. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Best of luck. And hopefully we can have you guys on at a future date and talk about all the great new funding that you got.
That would be wonderful.
Yes.
We would love to come back. Hopefully with great news. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You as
Bye.
well. Bye.
Take care.
Oh man, this is so frustrating, you guys. I'm angrier now after the interview.
Well, I think Karen was saying that, with this funding cut, that's 65% of their, I guess, operating budget to produce books in alternative format for their patrons.
Well, yeah.
That's a big chunk.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Without a plan in place, if this funding gets pulled, I mean, they're pretty much sunk.
Yes.
I don't know how you can operate with that huge of a chunk out of your operating budget.
Yeah, you've got staff, you've got transcribers to pay, you've got maintenance on Braille printers, because they're converting books into Braille and alternate formats. That all takes time and people to do that. It's not done, using machine learning or anything like that. So yeah, it's going to be detrimental to the service.
And I think that what a lot of people don't understand, and I have to say that I have been guilty of this before, is that they don't really understand what the process is to take a book and to turn that into an alternate format, whether that's large print or if it's Braille. That's quite the process, and you to make that into some sort of a commercial model. Like, come on. Like, that would mean that probably to produce a Braille book and then to pass that expense on to, say, a consumer, I mean, a $30 book would probably cost somebody, what, $200?
Yeah, I don't know. There was, I think, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't it used to be, or I guess it still probably is, that one print page almost equated to like 4 Braille pages? So,
yeah,
if you think of like buying a print book from Chapters, that's, I don't know, 200 pages. Well, convert that into a Braille book that now gets mailed out to a patron who wants that book in Braille. There's time involved to produce that book. It has to be reformatted. It has to be transcribed.
Yeah.
Everything has to be aligned. Like it's not just entered into Word or Duxbury and hit print.
No.
This is a time-consuming process, labor-intensive process.
Yeah. Somebody who's able-bodied, you can go to the library, browse the books, pick whatever you want. You take it out. You can go read it for free. That's just
It's what a public library does.
Yeah, that's right. And so next time, go to your public library and go try to find a Braille book.
It's not even just Braille, like let's say, I don't know, Stephen King comes out with a new book tomorrow. Sure, I could probably go and get that on Kindle or Audible or some of the other services, but there are people who need books in a specific format, whether it's human narration, whether it's Daisy text, Daisy audio, Braille. These guys are providing a service of providing books in so many different formats that nobody else gives you access to.
Yeah.
So you may have dexterity problems. You can't swipe and tap on your tablet, or maybe you're not computer literate. You need the Braille format, or you have a Daisy player. Like, there's nobody else doing this. These guys need a sustainable funding model.
Well, and I thought that was a really interesting point too, because if you look at the big picture, like the government tried to do this in 2018. So what happened? Big public pushback. So they blinked. They said, "Oh nope, JK, here you go, funding back." And then here we are, 3 years downstream, and they just do it again. So it's clear to me that this is not something that they consider a priority. And one of my fears is that, okay, they'll blink again this time, but then 2 years ago, they'll just going to keep doing this until they're eventually, they wear people down, and they just manage to do it without that much of a public backlash. Like, I don't know what the big picture plan for them is, but like it just seems insane to me that they are doing this, a couple years after passing this Accessible Canada Act that we made such a huge big deal about how, we want Canada to be a fully accessible country. Like, what a joke. Like, you can't even throw $4 million at, providing alternate access to the basic fundamental reading. Like, that's insane.
Hey, did you know the Prime Minister has an official country residence at Harrington Lake, Quebec? Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
No.
Yeah, it's being renovated right now. Guess how much is being spent on renovations?
$25 million.
$8.6 million.
Oh my God.
They can find $8.6 million to renovate a residence that the Prime Minister, I think, spent Easter in once, but they can't find $4 million for a library service that serves hundreds of thousands of Canadians.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. And, I've mentioned this on previous shows, but, I have to try, I think, and dig deeper to try and get somebody from the government or somebody who's helped developing the standards for this Accessible Canada Act, because really, it has been passed, but right now I have no idea what that act contains. I know standards are being looked at now, boards are being set up. Is literacy going to be a part of this Accessible Canada Act? And there's just so many unknown questions as to why this is still a discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to remember the Accessible Canada Act is really the only thing that was in there was just, basically making federal government services more accessible, right? It did nothing in terms of like anything else. And
at the point it was passed, yes.
And, and yes, they were talking about making like these special minister positions, which, as we found out last week when we talked to Mike Gifford, like a lot of those positions haven't even been filled yet. Like it's so, obviously, I don't know. I don't want to be too cynical about this, but even at the time, when the Accessible Canada Act was passed, we were talking about, well, geez, I really hope that this isn't just a PR stunt or this is just a lot of smoke and mirrors. Gee, it really feels like that could be the case, because I don't know. I don't get the feeling that accessibility and inclusion and equity is really all that much of a priority right now.
It certainly doesn't seem like it.
Nope.
Well, there you go.
But like I said, like hopefully what this does is that hopefully the pushback on this, and so anybody who is listening to this podcast, we demand you to reach out, contact your MP. I don't care. Open your window and stick your head out the window and scream about this. Like, this is bullshit. I think that if you have any sort of skin in the game, and even if you don't, even if you're able-bodied or whatever, and you have any sort of an interest in making the world a better place, this is a really, really important issue. Like, we're not just talking about, being able to read the newest Stephen King book in Braille. It goes far beyond that. Like, the implications of this is it's going to affect Braille literacy, because people can't be Braille literate if they can't actually access any books that are brailled.
Well, parents may not even be able to read stories to their children because these Braille/print books won't be available.
Yeah. And that in turn is going to impact Braille literacy, which is going to turn impact things like the employability of somebody, because if they're not Braille literate, they're much less likely to be employed farther down the line. Like this, the implications of this are really far reaching. Getting this funding back is really important, but also putting the spotlight on how important the work that CELA and NNELS is doing like that really needs to be highlighted as well. And we need more funding, not less funding.
All the information you need is on the CELA and NNELS website.
We'll put it in the show notes. We'll put the links to them. Get out there, contact your MP. Let's turn this boat around.
All right. So, Rob.
Yes.
Where can people find us?
They can find us online at www.atbanter.com.
They can also find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Oh,
What? That's my line.
He's throwing the curveballs today. Okay, that leaves the email address, Steve.
Email address is cowbell@atbanter.com.
Well done, sir.
Man.
All right.
Okay.
So,
And hang on.
Yes.
Before we go here, I think it's important to mention, as they said, contact Carla Qualtrough, the minister in charge. There's 2 ways to contact Carla, and please be respectful and specific in your ask to Carla. She can be reached by mail for free, no postage required when you're mailing an MP. It is Carla Qualtrough, House of Commons, Ottawa, Ontario, K1A0A6, or email her at carla.qualtrough at parl, as in Parliament, PRL.gc.ca. And if you don't know how to spell Qualtrough, because who does?
Tough. It's tricky.
It is QUALTROUF. And again, be respectful.
Wait, OUF? Really?
Oh, no, sorry.
What?
I guess that coffee hasn't kicked
let's
in.
try that again.
And if you don't know how to spell Qualtrough, which clearly I do not, it is QUALTROUGH.
Excellent.
All right, that is going to about do it for us this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. Big thanks to Karen and Daniella for joining us. Once again, encourage everybody to reach out to their MPs, and we will see everybody next week.
Bye-bye.
This podcast has been brought to you by Canadian Assistive Technology, providing low vision and blindness solutions across Canada. Find us online at www.canastech.com. That's CANASSTECH.com. Or call us toll free at 1-844-795-8324. For all your assistive technology servicing needs, call Chaos Technical Services at 778-847-6840 or find them online at chaostechnicalservices.com.